There's a particular segment of the guitar playing community which has recently convinced itself that Celestion Vintage 30s sound terrible, especially for heavy metal and rock. Now when you hear this statement, your first retort should be, which Vintage 30? Let's talk a little bit more about that. So not only has the Celestion Vintage 30 speaker been around for a little while, but its place of manufacture has changed. You've probably heard the saying, you know, are they English greenbacks or Chinese greenbacks? Meaning, are they manufactured by Celestion in the UK, or are they manufactured overseas in their Chinese factory? And this isn't one of those, hey, anything made in China is gonna suck kind of thing. It's simply stating that, hey, there's some different construction methods, possibly some different materials used, and most importantly, the speakers sound different. Furthermore, Celestion also manufactures specific speakers for different manufacturers. For example, they currently make a speaker in the UK for orange amplifiers, and they also make a 70 watt or a 60 watt Vintage 30 for MESA Boogie, depending on the cabinet that you buy. Interesting, right? Now, I don't own all the different incarnations of the Celestion Vintage 30 speaker. However, I do have some cab packs made by ML Audio, and the nice thing about that is he has shot the same mic position on a bunch of different V30s, which is really handy because we can compare them by reamping the same guitar track. Let's get into that now. Before we get going, let's talk about the signal chain. I'm playing an STR Guitars LJ1 model. This is a humbucker in the bridge position that I'm going to be playing on, made by a guy called Martin A. Smith. Great stuff, check it out. That is going straight into this Seriatone Son of Yeti. Another great little amp, into the Fractal X-Load, and then that is going into my Apollo Twin, where I'm going to load up different impulses in my DAWs. Okay, and what you're going to hear throughout all of these is the same mic positioning. So in the ML packs, this corresponds to the SM57 B1 position. Let's get going with the first cab. So as you can hear there are some huge differences there. Even though it's the same mic position on all of the speakers, the different make of speaker is impacting the tone radically different. And that's going to come down to, obviously, construction methods, construction materials, the type of magnet, to an extent the cabinet as well. But that should be really surprising if you've just thought of, hey, it's a Celestion Vintage 30, it's just one type of speaker, right? Well, as this demonstrates, that different eras, different places of manufacture, and also Celestion making speakers for different companies changes different things, and they have different specs. So because in this case the IR, and in the real world the speaker, the microphone and the preamp, is essentially acting like a post-EQ filter. Post-EQ on anything is so much more powerful than pre-EQ. So you can play around with your guitar pickups, and that is going to change the overall amount of gain that you're getting out of the amplifier and the compression characteristics and the distortion characteristics. But once you've got those things in place, the speaker and the microphone and the preamp, or in this case the impulse response, is going to have a drastic effect on the overall tone of your guitar, including how it's going to sit in a mix. So choose your impulses and choose your speaker and choose your microphones wisely, because that is one of the major factors in getting a good guitar tone. So you can hear with this Bogner impulse with the Chinese vintage 30s, this is kind of really fizzy and undefined to me. And that to me has this kind of like brittle mid-range, which isn't very appealing. But when we have a listen to the old vintage 30, the traditional MESA one, my gosh, this is a beautiful impulse to play with. And that is surprisingly dark and sort of rich in the mids. It doesn't have the piercing high end that you would associate with an SM57 on a V30, right, Glenn Fricker? That to me sounds more like your sort of classic greenback type of tone. It's just tighter in the low end and more defined in the mids, which I really, really like. That's one of my favorite sounds, and I think a MESA cabinet, one of the traditional ones with some of these old vintage 30s, is going to be on my acquisition list, because I would love to have that cabinet and be able to mic it up in the real world. Now, that's just using the SM57. Of course, we can use multiple microphones on a cabinet to bring out different characteristics. So if you're in the real world and you've got a speaker which you love the sound of, in this case, you can probably get away with just slapping a 57 in the sweet spot and going. It's going to sound so good and it's going to make your mixes so easy. However, if you've got a speaker which, say, for example, sounds way too piercing in the high end when you're using an SM57, or it's got those ice pick high mids, you can always play around with different microphones. You can play around with blending different microphones. For example, you might put an SM57 and put it say halfway between the speaker cone and the speaker edge, as well as using something like a ribbon microphone, whether it's a budget ribbon like a Cascade Fathead, or it's a high-end one like a Roya R121, right on the cone to bring out some of that sort of like low-end and low-mid fatness. There's so many different things you can do, and whichever cab pack you're using, whether you're using the ML stuff or using some of the other things, you can get plenty of these mic blends. I really like using Fractal's Cab Lab because it lets me blend together different impulses and basically act like being able to turn up different microphones, but I can also blend IRs from different manufacturers, which I think is pretty cool, and a cool way to get a best of both worlds sort of thing going on. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed that look at some different vintage 30 IRs. They are clearly not all made the same, and if you want to find out more, you can go and get the ML Audio cab packs for your Fractal Audio Axe effects. You can subscribe to my channel if you enjoy this, because I'll have some more content coming up. And in the meantime, be excellent to one another, and I'll see you soon.